I mean, can you go into the background on this, Scott, in terms of, I mean, steroids, this isn't a new idea. Are you surprised that this would have, is it a really positive effect, or do you think it's not, could it be statistically an aberration to cut deaths by a third, do you think?
Well, this is a well-designed study, so I have confidence in the study, and this is a pretty robust finding out of this study. If you go to the CDC's website right now, they recommend against the use of steroids in the setting of COVID and acute respiratory distress syndrome. There's been a couple of open-label studies, not as rigorously done as this, that didn't show a benefit, and we know that steroids used in the setting of ARDS generally, there's been a lot of studies in the past that have looked at it, including ARDS induced by viral syndromes that haven't shown a treatment effect. This is a very positive finding, and it's a robust finding. It's a well-done study, so I think it needs to be validated, but it certainly suggests that this could be beneficial in this setting. I think this is an important finding here today from this rigorously done recovery trial. So
you're saying it's a big enough study to where a third it would not be. It's unlikely that would not be able to repeat it. It was statistically significant that you reduce it by a third, and there were enough patients to make it where you have confidence in the conclusion.
Yeah, this is a strong treatment effect. We're going to need to see the underlying data and analyze it more closely. But this is a strong treatment effect coming out of a well-designed study. And obviously, there's been a lot of interest in trying to use steroids in this setting. It could be that COVID is inducing some specific immune response that's precipitating the lung damage. And we know that it's inducing cytokine storm. And that's why doctors are using IL-6 and JAK inhibitors to try to affect that immune response. It could be that steroids in this setting is different than using steroids in the typical ARDS setting. I mean, part of the overhang of steroids around COVID was that we've used it before in the setting of sepsis and acute respiratory distress syndrome, and we haven't had much luck. There's been a lot of studies in the past that haven't shown a benefit, so there was an assumption that it wasn't going to be beneficial here. Some of the early evidence where steroids were used in China didn't show a benefit. Doctors had turned away from it. It wasn't being recommended in China. The CDC right now on their website doesn't recommend the use of steroids. So this is an important finding. It's going to change dogma. I think it needs to be replicated, and we need to see the underlying data, but it's going to probably have an immediate impact on what doctors are doing in the ICU setting.
Yeah, you point out, so it wasn't expected to work. You just basically said, like, seen when we've seen with other acute respiratory distress syndromes, steroids have not been effective, and sometimes they actually been counterproductive.
That's right. And if you go to the CDC's website right now and you pull up some of the data on it, there's 6, 7 different studies that they reference in the setting of COVID, looking back at older studies of steroids in the setting of ARDS and viral-induced ARDS, where it's been negative.
That makes me wonder. Then, do you think it's repeatable? I mean, at this point you said it's a rigorous study, but maybe this should be taken with a grain of salt because it's so surprising.
I don't think so. I mean, we need to see the underlying data. We need to validate it. But we know that COVID is inducing a different kind of inflammatory response than some other infections in the lungs. The sepsis that you're seeing in the ARDS from COVID is probably induced by cytokine release. And so we know that there's an overwhelming inflammatory response. That's why doctors are using drugs that are more targeted to try to intervene in that, like the IL-6 drugs. Steroids are going to have the same general effect. They're just not as targeted. So it's plausible that a steroid in this setting could act differently than it would typically act in the setting of sepsis or ARDS. You could postulate a reason why it might work here and not work in another setting because of the way COVID's affecting the lungs. We're going to need more science to understand this, but this is a well-done study. This is why we do studies like this.